So let's talk about what a reserve study is. How many in here have a reserve study? Just about everybody, right? So what is a reserve study? So a reserve study is where an engineer comes out, and my guess is everyone in here has a reserve study from building reserves or reserve advisors, one of the two. So what happens? So an engineer comes out, identifies all of the things that you're responsible for in your governing documents to replace and repair as an association. Identify those things. Then they're going to make an inventory of them. They're going to assess the current condition of it and what it costs to replace those things and when it needs to be replaced. So they've got national databases, right, of what the lifespan is of something. So this chair looks like it's probably, 4 years old maybe, and they probably have a lifespan of 10 years. So it's got a 6-year lifespan, right? That's kind of what they do. And then they have a database that they can go and reference for what that pricing is. And then they do the financial analysis piece to it. Now that we have an inventory, now that we have a plan of what's going to be replaced and when and what the condition is of everything, now we're going to say, well, here's how much money we need to make sure that we are replacing those things so that we're adequately funding for the replacement of those things, right? I think everyone kind of understands the 101 on reserves on that, right? So it recommends a contribution every year, what you're supposed to be. So that should be a line item of your operating budget, right? How much you put away to the reserve. And what's the end result when they do that? I've never seen one that comes back and says, you're in great shape, right? No, they all come back and say you're broke and you're underfunded, right? That's just, because what do we do? Developer builds a property, they plant a whole bunch of trees that are going to be too big for each other and crowd one another and make it look good to sell the units, and they keep the dues low because they're not going to save money because they want to make it enticing for everyone to sell. And then 10 years later, maintenance and replacement of things start saying, oh, we got no money for that kind of stuff, right? Every association has gone through this exact cycle. So every association, when they get a reserve study, comes back with the same result. You don't have enough money, right? So don't feel like you're alone if that's what you are. So then you have to go through a process of how do we beef up, and Barry's a great example. I'm going to pick on one of my treasurers right now. Barry is a part of an association that was built in the 80s, right? Yeah. Single family, townhome type association, where the association is responsible for all of the exterior maintenance. It's a big financial burden responsibility. It's a fairly affluent community, so it's Barry's very modest. It's a very affluent community. So they've never really been serious about saving, because whenever something happened, they just wrote a check. They just special assessed for it, right? Just something happened, wrote a check. Well, that doesn't work anymore, right? Now they're getting to that age where more and more things are happening. So we had to go through a paradigm shift exercise of getting people to understand saving money for things that they say, well, I'm not going to see the roof in 20 years, so why am I saving for it? My retort is because you've used it for the last 20 years, that's why you're paying for it. But that's a side thing. So anyway, so back to reserve study. So usually you see a graph, right? And understanding, so I go back to this, threshold funding. So there's different ways to look at reserving. So when you look at this graph of the green is every year is what we're saving, we're building up, right? Because that increases because inflation increases. The red is when you have big expenses, right? So you kind of look at that. The gray is what the cash flow is to meet that. So one of the things that when you're looking at the methodology of figuring out how much money should we be saving, that reserve company use what they call threshold funding. And they look for the critically low year. So here would be the two critically low years. And if you were to read their study, you would see that, well, the reason why we're building up so much cash here is because we have this critical low here and we never want to go below, right? So there's a baseline and a threshold. And someone mentioned 3 months worth of operating expenses for your operating checking, which is great. That's how they come up with the threshold funding. You should never go below 3 months worth of your operating in your reserve account, which is scary, actually. When you think about it, that's scary. But that should only happen in 1 year. That's your threshold year, right? So a reserve study is a guide, right? I would always tell a board that it's not a Bible to dictate what you can and can't do. It's a guide. But what I will also tell you is that that national database that's used is accurate. Okay, so it says the roofs don't need to be done for 5 years. Well, you know, we've been really good about preventative maintenance on our roofs, so I bet you our roofs don't really need to be replaced for 7 years. Okay, but you still have to replace it, and guess what? 2 years later, it just got 2 years more expensive. So I like to tell a board, use it as a guide. You don't have to do everything it says that we have to do in 2023. You can move things around and shift things around, but at the end of the day, everything that's in a reserve study still has to be done. So take it seriously. It is a guide, but it also is a tool that's accurate.